Today topic is solvency ratio. Firstly, we want to understand what is solvency ratio. What is solvency? Solvency means ability of the business to repay its outside liability. Solvency ratio are calculated to asset the ability of the firm to meet its long-term liability as and when they become due. Solvency ratio reveal that how much amount in a business has been invested by the proprietor and how much amount has been raised from outside sources. Solvency ratio disclose the firm's ability to pay interest regularly and long-term loans at maturity. Important solvency ratio are as debt equity ratio, total asset to debt ratio, proprietary ratio, interest coverage ratio. First ratio is debt to equity ratio. Debt to equity ratio is equal to debt upon equity या shareholders या debt upon equity. Long term debt is equal to long term borrowing plus long term provision या total debt minus current liability या capital employed minus equity is called debt equity ratio. Debt equity ratio. What is debt equity ratio? Once again, this is ratio express the relationship between the long term debt and short term. Long term debt, external equity and shareholder fund, internal equities. It indicates the proportion of fund which are acquired by long-term borrowing in comparison to shareholders fund. It is calculated as debt upon equity. So this is the formula. Equity shareholder fund is equal to share capital plus reserve and surplus. Another formula is total asset minus total debt या नॉन करंट एसेट में से नॉन करंट एसेट में वर्किंग कैपिटल ऐड कर दो माइनस नॉन करंट लायबिलिटी कर दो तो डेब्ट इक्विटी रेशियो निकल कर आता है. व्हाट इज वर्किंग कैपिटल रेशियो? वर्किंग कैपिटल इज इक्वल टू, ये वर्किंग कैपिटल का फार्मूला करंट एसेट माइनस करंट लायबिलिटी इज कॉल्ड वर्किंग कैपिटल. In other words, shareholder fund include equity share fund, preference share capital, security premium, reserve, general reserve, capital reserve, reserve and surplus. So interpretation, debt to equity ratio is 2:1. Consider safe. If the debt to equity ratio is more than that, it is alarming signal for long-term lender. Therefore, the lower this ratio, the better it is for long-term lender. Significance. This ratio assesses to long-term financial position of the business firm. It is also indicate the extent to which the firm depend upon the outsider for existence. It shows the proportion of total fund acquired by a firm by a way of loan. This is a one case: long term borrowing, long term provision, current asset liability, non current asset, current asset. This is the amount: 2 lakh, 1 lakh, 50,000, 3 lakh, 60,000, 90,000. Now the question is, what is debt equity ratio? So debt equity ratio is equal to debt upon equity. Debt is equal to long term borrowing plus long term provisions. In this question, long term borrowing is rupees 2 lakh, long term provision is rupees 1 lakh. जब लॉन्ग टर्म बोरोइंग को लॉन्ग टर्म प्रोविजंस के साथ जोड़ देते हैं तो डेब्ट की प्राप्ति होती है. और इक्विटी का पता लगाना है तो आप आइए देखें, करंट एसेट प्लस नॉन करंट एसेट माइनस करंट लायबिलिटी माइनस लॉन्ग टर्म बोरोइंग माइनस लॉन्ग टर्म प्रोविजंस, ये इसका फार्मूला है इक्विटी को निकालने का. तो करंट एसेट इज इक्वल टू 90,000, नॉन करंट एसेट इज इक्वल टू 3,60,000, करंट लायबिलिटी इज इक्वल टू 50,000, लॉन्ग टर्म बोरोइंग इज इक्वल टू 2 लाख एंड लॉन्ग टर्म प्रोविजन इज इक्वल टू 1 लाख. 90,000 में 3,60,000 जमा कर दीजिए, 50,000, 2 लाख, 1 लाख को घटा दीजिए, इक्विटी आ जाएगा. तो इक्विटी का फार्मूला फिर दोबारा सुन लीजिए वंस अगेन. Debt to equity ratio is equal to debt upon equity. In this question, debt is 3 lakh, equity is 1 lakh, so ratio is 3:1. This is the another question. Calculate the debt to equity ratio from the following particular: equity share capital rupees 2 lakh, 12%, preference share capital 50,000, and reservement surplus 50,000. So what is the formula? Formula is equal to debt upon equity. This is another another remaining part of the question. Find the debt equity ratio.